Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and this week I need to start looking at what I'm going to do for the fuel tank for the Alfarrari. Okay, so those of you who watched last episode will have seen that I welded up the entire rear end. It's all one piece, but it is not welded back onto the car. It's just sitting here at the moment, because before I weld it on solid, I want to sort of finalize what I'm doing as far as the fuel system goes. Now, as many of you have seen, I built a flat floor in the boot of the car here, and that is normally where the fuel tank goes, the factory fuel tank. I pretty much can't use the factory fuel tank in this car because there's not going to be enough room for the exhaust, so I'm going to have to fit underneath the back here. It's fine for the factory exhaust, or maybe slightly bigger than factory exhaust, but I've got a V8 Ferrari engine going in, so I'm going to need some exhaust space, and it just wasn't going to give it to me. So that's half the reason why I built the flat floor. And that means I need to move on to what sort of fuel tank I'm going to use. So that's where I got to talking to Raceworks, and they actually supply me with their 75 litre fuel tank. So this is the big boy, and this particular one actually has a sump on the bottom, so a lower section down here. So basically it just helps with the fuel delivery, stops even when it starts getting low, it continues the fuel delivery right down low into the bottom of the engine, so you don't get starvation. It's a foam-filled tank, and I need to work out how I'm going to go fitting this into the car, because it's not going to be as simple as it may seem. So to fit the fuel cell into the car, I don't want to just sit it in the middle of the boot here and just have it flopping around, because I still want this as a road car. I still want to have some space, and that's one of the reasons why I went for the big fuel cell, because I want to actually tuck it right up the back, up here, partly on this back shelf. But as you may have noticed, the tank is too big for that, so I need to modify the tank. And that is where it's going to take a little bit more time and playing around, particularly because I am not that experienced with aluminium welding, as in I have almost zero. But basically what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut up the tank to fit onto this shelf. So first things first is I need to do some measuring and work out roughly what I need to do to make it fit. All right, so what you're watching me do then is I made a template of the side of the fuel tank as it currently stood, and then I did a bit of measuring, a bit of trial and error, and cutting out a notch out of the back of the, it'll be a notch out of the back of the tank, so that it can sit on the shelf at the back here, still fit in line with the sort of the back of the back seat, but and also still give me enough clearance to be able to bolt in my rear shocks that are up the back here. So it should sit, sort of tuck in nicely onto the shelf, but still sit down onto the base of the boot. That is basically the size of chunk I need to take out of the tank. So let me do a little bit of quick maths and work out exactly how much fuel we're going to be losing out of the tank. Okay, so after some quick maths, I worked out that this tank is actually a little bit over 75 litres. It's more like about 79 litres. And by making the tank look like that, so cutting this bit out the full way across, I'm going to lose about 12.5 litres capacity roughly. So it takes it down to about a 66 litre tank, which is still plenty for a regular road car. I'll actually get reasonable distance out of it. I haven't actually researched what the standard Ferrari's fuel tank size is, and even its range, but I think there should be plenty of fuel in this. So now my challenge is to actually, I need to cut up my fuel tank and take that bit out, and my plan is to actually reuse this same bit of aluminium, and I'm just going to flip it upside down and weld it back on again. Obviously I'm going to have to cut the ends off, but it's going to take a little bit of trimming and playing around, and hopefully I don't ruin my nice new fuel cell. All right, first thing I'm going to tackle is I'm going to cut these feet off of the back of the tank here. This is the part that's going to be cut out. I'm going to try and cut them off as neatly and tidily as I can so that I can potentially reuse them to mount the tank down somewhere else later. But for the time being, because I'm going to reuse this piece by flipping it upside down, this part is going to be on the inside of the tank. I don't want them inside the tank. They're just going to get in the way. So I'm going to try and cut them off now. Okay, so as you can see here, I've gone through and I've scored in the parts that I'm going to cut off of the fuel tank. And now what I'm going to do is I've clamped on this piece of scrap here just so that I can hold it all nice and stable while I'm cutting. So hopefully I get a nice straight square line and I can actually run along the edge of that and keep it all just nice. Because if there's big gaps, it's going to be much, much harder to weld. It's going to be hard to weld no matter what, but big gaps are going to make it much worse. Okay, so that is the back of my brand new fuel cell cut up. I found that trying to use that clamped on piece didn't work at all. It ended up sliding and moving, and I did it much straighter and neater and cleaner just doing it freehand following my nice clear scribe line. So that was definitely, definitely a learning curve. Now, before I go too far, I want to make sure that I can actually get this in the car and see how it fits. Now, it's not going to fit properly yet because there's still a floor there where this sump needs to go. And I'm going to have to cut that through the floor of the car, but at least I'll get a reasonable idea of whether it'll fit or not. And whether I can actually get it in and out through the boot hole. That is another challenge in itself. Well, that's the first win, because before I actually did try to fit the fuel cell in through this boot hole complete, and it wouldn't fit. It was too big to actually get through here, but now with the back of it cut off, it actually fits in and out quite easily. So now it's time to start working with the piece I cut off, and I need to start preparing this so that I can actually weld it back onto the tank and remake my fuel cell. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So basically, as you can see here, I've flipped this piece around, cut the ends off, and I've been trimming it up so that I actually have, instead of these, the inner piece when I first cut it, obviously overlapped because it's the exact same size as the outside piece. But I've actually ground down these edges on all the way around so that they're basically meeting sort of like that, if you can imagine, so that I can weld and fill in that gap in between. That's the plan, so that I've got a nice solid area to weld in. This edge, obviously, I've kept from the original, so that should be a good solid weld that's already there. So it just means I have to go around and add this on. But before I do that, I might just use the off-cut pieces I've got off the ends here and do a little bit of practice. Just keep practicing with this exact same material, clean it up, and make sure that I can actually do some sort of half-decent welds before I try and tackle a fuel tank. I'm really happy with that. That's actually come along quite well. You can see here there's a bit of a schmutz thing where I dipped the tungsten halfway along, so that's not good, but I'm pretty sure that will be a nice fuel tight weld. I'm quite happy with the outcome of that, so I think now it's time to start going back over to the tank itself, cleaning it up and getting it ready to start welding it together. All right, fingers crossed this all goes well. But I'm going to try and take my time. I don't want to rush it. I want to try and get it as neat as possible. If I start going, something that's going crazy, I'm going to stop. But basically, it's all set up now. I've got it all laid out, all cleaned up. I cleaned it all up with some acetone. Everything's sort of filed back. Everything's sort of fitting pretty much exactly where I wanted. I do want to lift this edge a little bit as I go, just to try and get things right. But I think it's time to shut up and start welding. All right, well that actually didn't go too bad. It's pretty ugly in spots. It's definitely not the greatest. Like along here, it actually doesn't look too bad, but you can see there's a big lump right there that's not that pretty. And some of it, I think here I started off too cold, so I was going really, really slow. And you can sort of see when I turned the heat up a bit more, it went a bit better. There's sort of mixed results all around the place. Definitely not a TIG welding expert by any means. This is my first real go at aluminium TIG welding, so overall I'm pretty happy. It's not pretty, but I am hoping it will do the job, and I just saw a couple of little pinholes. But generally you can see the pinholes, so they're easy to sort of find. They generally sort of fill in. It's much prettier and easier to do than MIG welding, so all right, moving on. Now I've got it in the car. I can't actually set it completely flat because we've got the sump on the bottom of it here. I have to cut a hole in the floor so that the sump can sit through and be, access to have the fuel pumps and stuff under the floor. So the boot space is going to be reasonably clear. To do that, I've got it in here now. I need to actually start marking out where I'm going to cut this, the hole for the sump, and work out exactly how I'm going to make the hole work for me. Okay, so what I had to do here, I've measured up the size of the sump here on the bottom of the tank, and also enough room so that these can actually slot down in through the hole in the boot. And I've transferred that over here into the boot and made a square that's big enough. Basically, when the tank is at its full height, it can't slip underneath the bonnet hinge, the boot hinge, but once it's sitting down flat with the boot, it'll actually have clearance. So I've made this hole so that I can sort of get the tank in and then slide it sideways, and it'll sit down into the hole and should fit nicely. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to drill out the corners, and then I'm going to cut out this hole, or sort of just in from this hole all the way around, so I can bend down the edges, have a nice formed structure there that will be a nice neat edge, and then yeah, we'll see what we do from there, see if the tank actually fits the way it's supposed to. Okay, and now you can see that the tank fits nice and flat. I've cut the hole in and I've bent the edges down. What I'm going to do now, I have to do a bit more panel beating. This leading edge, I'm going to have to fold all the way over on itself, just so I've got a nice, neat finish on it. And I'll do a little bit of shaping on this panel to get it to sit nice and flat now. So let's get the edges looking all nice and pretty so that this sits the way I want it to. Okay, so that all fits really well in the boot of the floor now. I'm pretty happy with that. There's still a bit of work to do on this boot floor itself. I'm not happy with the amount of oil canning that's in it, so I'm going to do a bit more heat shrinking and stuff when I take the back end back off of this car again, which I'm going to do probably next episode. The next thing I need to touch on is, as you saw before, I cut off the other two of these mounting brackets off of the car, and one of them I'm actually going to put back on the side of the tank up in the back corner up there, and the other one I'll take you around and show you that now. The other one is going to sit in here, accessed from this little access panel where the rear suspension mount goes. There'll be a bolt hole just down here, so that'll sit down there quite nicely. Okay, and so while I'm there doing those two mounts, obviously now my boot floor has this big hole in it, but I thought ahead, and I knew what I was going to do with that, is I actually have this sort of leftover bracket here, this was actually the piece of the side. I'm going to cut a strip of this off, and I'm actually going to place it onto the edge of the tank there, and have a welded on tab so that it sits down. This will be welded to the tank, so as it sits down, it'll sit nicely flat on the floor and just look nice and neat and tidy. It'll finish it off, and there'll never be any hole in there. I'll probably put some sealer or something like that, sort of some weather stripping or something around that whole drop-down section anyway when I'm doing the final assembly. But for now, a bit of a nice, neat little cover should do the job nicely. So let's mark all this out, cut it out, and start welding it on. All right, so the internal corners were much uglier than the external corners, but I'll just grind that back a bit and tidy it up. It's well and truly strong enough. It's just not as pretty. Okay, so last thing for today on this tank is I need to mount back in my fuel level sender. Now, this is a fuel level sender that comes with the unit. The only trouble is that now I have cut the bottom of the tank out. It doesn't go to the bottom. So what I need to do is I need to block this hole up, and then I need to make another hole sort of probably up near the front somewhere for the fuel level sender. Not a big deal, relatively easy to do for now. The only issue I have realised with this is obviously because I've cut a big chunk out of the bottom sort of third of the tank. By the time the fuel gauge is going to read sort of great down to about a third, and then it's going to go full really quickly because there's less volume down the bottom. That may be something depending on what ECU I have. I may be able to sort of fudge the signal with that, but that can be sorted out later. Fuel tank's going to have plenty of fuel in it. I just need to make sure you fill it up before a third of the tank. Anyway, let's clean this up and put a patch over this hole here, and then we can work out where we're going to put the fuel sender, and fuel tank should be most of the way there. Alright, well, so as you might have seen, this has been filmed over 2 days, and the first day my welding was definitely much better than my second day. I seem to struggle more with the internal corners. The external corners I could do quite well, and the internal corners I seem to need a lot more heat, and yeah, look, it's done it, but this has actually put, I'll wait for it to cool down, but it's put a lot of heat in. It's actually warped the top of the tank a bit, which I'm not really very pleased about, but it is what it is. That's done now. But that is all the time I have for today, so I think that means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, now we have finally reached the part of the Alfa history that we are really interested in. In 1963, the first of the Alfa 105s were released with the Giulia Sprint GT. It was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro as head of Bertone after coming off the success of the 2600 Sprint. The Sprint GT was produced from 1963 to 1965, and it's known for its step nose. It came from 1.6 litre twin cam with twin Webers making 105 horsepower. Featuring a 5-speed gearbox and 4-wheel disc brakes, it was a very advanced car for its day, and in total almost 22,000 were produced. A convertible version of the Giulia Sprint GT was built by Carrozzeria Touring. Only about 1,000 were produced, however, and they had a lot of trouble reinforcing the rigidity in the chassis. By the end of its run, Touring was in financial difficulty and went out of business shortly afterwards.
Alright, I was quite happy with the progress in that video. I doing some aluminium welding for the first time and it actually working. It was quite good. Those of you who are eagle-eyed will notice that I can't get to the filler anymore. That is something I'm going to have to work on next episode. But overall, we're doing well.
In the meantime, we'll keep plugging away.
Yes.
Yes, very much so. Okay, we hope you're enjoying the shows. If you are, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And
you can help us out on Patreon and watch these videos a day before everybody else. Make sure you check out the merch. Just go and support the channels you enjoy.
This like, one's Bad Obsession Motorsport.
Project Binky. And we'll see you on the next one. See you guys.
Hey guys. It's the first of the... It's hard. It's a very Italian name. A convertible there. Convertible there. A convertible... Can't say it.